completely emblematic in that sense. And Israel, for its part, I think has become emblematic of, if I can say it this way, of what's wrong in the world. In other words, Israel sees itself as a white, European, global north country. It places itself, Israel sells this whole idea of a clash of civilizations between the civilized world and the barbarian world, and we're clearly on the civilized side. It uses that language. And it clearly represents American interests, global north interests, and it makes the occupied territory, in fact, a laboratory for developing arms and weapons, military tactics, plus security systems and means of control that it puts at the disposal of global north armies. And Israel, has an occupation now for 47 years. And it's attempting, and I'll talk about it tonight a little bit, to actually impose a new apartheid regime on the area. So in many ways, Israel this whole conflict represents in miniature, in a microcosm, much larger global forces. I even talk sometimes about global Palestine, and that is that Palestine is sort of the microcosm of the world system and power relations in general. And of course, it disrupts the Middle East. Israel is getting from the United States $30 billion in new arms over a 10-year period from 2008 to 2018, and that will be renewed and increased. In the Middle East, that's getting, at the same time, about $120 billion in new arms from the United States. Just this last year, Saudi Arabia bought $74 billion of arms from the United States. So that it's a conflict. John Kerry said not long ago that we're not going to be able to resolve the wider issues of the Middle East and stabilize the Middle East and get on to development as long as the Israel-Palestine conflict remains. It's not that it creates all these other conflicts, but it's this aggravating source of alienation and polarization and militarization in the region. So that it plays a role like that, but at the same time that spills over into your lives as well. It goes on and on and on in terms of disrupting and distorting the international system. So, for example, as most of you know, Israel has an intimate military security relationship with Canada, for example. It signed in 2006 what's called the Canada-Israel Public Safety Agreement, where Israel's been invited into your prison systems, training your police, border controls, immigration policies, urban security, the very heart of your sovereignty here in Canada. And basically, Israel is exporting the occupation, which is what I mean by global Palestine, but at the same time, your country is importing it, because as we move towards more and more neoliberalism, more austerity, more cuts in social programs, education, the state begins to withdraw from being responsible for the well-being of people, and the income disparities grow, the 1%, 99%, you begin to see tremendous rises, not only in military budgets, but in internal security budgets. Security forces, and of course police forces. Almost since I've been here, I've been trying to keep an eye out because I'm writing a book about this, I've seen changes in the uniforms that Canadian police wear. The uniforms are being changed from normal police uniforms to kind of militarized SWAT team type paramilitary uniforms. And of course, your police are being trained by Israel. Ferguson is here in Winnipeg in many ways. So, you know, in a sense, this you could look at the Israel-Palestine conflict as a kind of a petri bowl, as a kind of a place where you experiment on people. You know, what country has a laboratory of 4.5 million people where it can really experiment in terms of security devices? I mean, that your airports are largely equipped with biometrics. Israel's a world leader in biometrics. Eye recognition, but facial recognition, voice recognition, body recognition for places like airports or for police forces. Well, you've got 4.5 million Palestinians walking through 600 Israeli checkpoints every day. You know, of course, the Israeli security industries are at the cutting edge of developing these kinds of technologies. So in many ways, you know, one of the slogans we have in the Israeli peace movement is we're all Palestinians. And we mean that in the sense of solidarity. But literally, we can say we're all Palestinians from the point of view of being on the receiving end of weapons and security devices and tactics that are perfected on the Palestinians. They're not the end users. You can't explain the ferocious, disproportionate attack of Israel on Gaza last summer by military threats. There's no military explanation for that arms that were used that are used in conventional wars. I mean, laser-guided rockets from Apache helicopters, artillery, tanks, naval ships bombarding the shore, drones. I mean, weaponry, really of massive weaponry of warfare being used in a little tiny place without an army called Gaza. The only way you can explain that is by testing and developing weaponry and tactics of urban warfare in particular. That comes right in, and it's less relevant to the militaries. It's still relevant to militaries, but it's more relevant even to police forces. And that comes, so the people of Gaza aren't the end users. Israel didn't do that to really put down Gaza. You're the end users. It's exported, and it comes right into your communities through your police departments, security forces, and you just have to listen. I've been here 3 weeks, and I listen to the rhetoric of your government. You know, and I'm already picking up that when you have your next election, whether it's October or before, the main issue is going to be terrorism. So even your language is beginning to be the language of Israel. I feel right at home. You're using the same language, you know, that we use without Palestinians. In other words, it's all exportable. It's all spilling out of Israel-Palestine into the Middle East and then well beyond globally. So I think that's a reason why we should be concerned about this conflict, because it has implications for everybody way beyond the Israelis and Palestinians themselves. And we'll come back to some of those issues, but then let's go back and just look at this conflict itself, because resolving this conflict then could go a long way towards trying to create counter pressures to the kind of militarized policies of governments that exist today. In other words, if we could resolve this, if in a way, to put it this way, the Palestinians can win, that in fact occupation can be defeated, militarism, even global North militarism with all its power, can be defeated because we the people, civil society, have organized in order to prevent this conflict from going on. That sends a tremendously hopeful and strong message to other peoples in the world that are struggling. So in many ways, the Palestinians have a much larger role than simply defeating the Israeli occupation. They can really show the way if they're supported by all of us, if through that we create a global movement that can really help reverse a lot of the policies that our governments are imposing on us. I'm not going to go on and on. I feel like I'm running for office or something. At any rate, let's go back to this